I think we're going to get started a little bit early. So this is about star apps, and this is not a stack in the sense of the lamp stack or mean stack. And we'll just talk about these are just patterns, and I just figured that I needed an acronym, and I just put these together, and they kind of naturally fit in that angle. And I also want to tell you to relax. A lot of people come with notepads. Obviously, feel free to take your own notes, but I'm also recording this, so you'll have all the content and material with you. Oh, yeah, I'll introduce myself later. And the overall question I guess I wanted to sort of bring to you is what goes through your head when you hear things about tech stack and tech choices from various companies. So what goes through your head when you hear that the New York Times has moved to React and GraphQL? What goes through your head when you hear that Shopify has open sourced their design system? And it's not just Shopify; it's also IBM. It's also who are these companies? I forget, Atlassian. This is the UK government, the US government, GitHub, and Audi, and Microsoft. Like everyone is sort of jumping in on this trend. What goes through your head when you hear that PayPal, where we're at, has moved to the Jamstack, and in particular is using GraphQL on the back end and Gatsby on the front end? These are sort of head tilting choices. Here's an eye-popping number. The number is a little bit hard to read, but it basically says that Airbnb went through they keep extensive production logs of everything erroring in production, and they went through and they said that 38% of their bugs could have been caught by using type systems. The reason it's hard to read is because you can actually see that from the Hacker News thread discussing it, which is very popular. And the Hacker News thread points to a Reddit thread where it was also posted, and the Reddit thread points to a picture which I took. So that was me at the conference where they announced that they moved all of Airbnb to TypeScript. And this is an interesting movement because it's not just hype anymore. It's companies investing hundreds and thousands of developer hours and resources picking these technologies. I think these are worth thinking about and investing in. So the question, I'm going to reframe it, is what is driving front-end architecture decisions? And notice I put a kind of star there, meaning that I'm not really concerned in telling people what to do. You obviously know your situations best, but I think it's worth being descriptive, like trying to organize, having a framework for understanding what the masses and masses of companies out there are doing, and understanding like maybe that's a fit for you as well. So having a framework for understanding that helps you organize the information. My name is Sean. I go by Swix on the internet. I work at Netlify. We do awesome website hosting, mostly for Jamstack apps, which are sort of serverless first apps, like static site generated apps. I am a key proponent of Learn in Public, where, and this is a lot of what I'm doing. I'm sort of collecting a lot of information, organizing it, and then delivering it as a talk. And hopefully you can engage with me, and I learn from you that way as well. And the other part of one of my side hustles is I'm also a moderator on the r/React.js subreddit. So if you're interested in React, there's 140,000 of us learning about React, sharing content, information, discussing, hiring each other. It's a great community if you want to join us. And part of the job moderating the Reddit is I see a lot of news items come across my desk every day. And so like, I start seeing trends, right, every day, like, different companies making tech choices. And this is the origin of this talk. I was like, what is going on with all these different tech choices, and how do I make sense of all of them? And this is, first of all, a stupid question because there's no one human being that can hold all of this in their head. But I think if you see enough patterns and try to sort of justify them, maybe it might be useful for making our own decisions, and that's the main thing I'm trying to do here. So for the New York Times, I just felt like I should lift some quotes. Obviously, go read the articles yourselves. For them, it says that React is helping them collaborate faster and reduce code duplication with reusable components. The components war is kind of over. Everyone uses components now, so it's not even interesting to talk about. But what is interesting is binding data to components. So that's where Apollo and React work really well together. Relay does this as well, and Relay is a GraphQL technology from Facebook, where each component brings together its own data requirements, And as you snap together your components, you snap together your data model as well. And the application figures out how to sort of deliver that to the components. So that's the New York time. CodePen is a for the front end people in the room, this will be an integral part of your prototyping and your learning. CodePen itself also recently moved to Apollo. They moved to React a couple of years ago, and for them, the way they sort of looked at it is that it empowers the front end to do what the front end does best. I highly recommend actually checking out the CodePen Radio podcast because it literally is the founders and then the employees talking about building the company while they build the company. It's a fantastic way to get a look at the inside of architectural decisions at it's a smallish company. It's like 10 people, but it's definitely at the forefront of all the front end technologies because they serve front end developers, so they know what's up. Airbnb, we already talked about the TypeScript move, but they also are very, very vocal proponents of GraphQL and Apollo. They assert that they're moving 10 times faster. That's because Adam Neary, the guy who wrote this, is a bombastic individual, but I do think that there is a lot to be gained from the developer productivity over there. Anyway, I don't want to, I could just go on. There's example after example, not super helpful unless you have an organizing principle around this. So let's talk about what people are using, and then we'll build up from there. That's kind of how I learn. I learn from specific examples and then take generalizable lessons out of that. So people are using Storybook. What is Storybook? Storybook is this, where the resolution sucks, but it's well. Hang on, actually, okay. I hope I'm recording this in a better resolution. But anyway, it's a way to preview your components in isolation, right? So you have them separate from your from your production app, so you can actually work on them separately. And once you're assembling your production app, you can just snap together different pieces of your predefined design system together. This is also a great way to document things, including props and test things. So instead of you could obviously write tests which are automated, but then you can also test by just manually interacting with it and just visually understanding how things change as you interact with that particular component. Again, independently of the rest of your app. But Storybook isn't the only player in this space. There's also a bunch of others. DocZ is another one that's pretty cool. They were the first to go TypeScript first. Docusaurus it's very much focused on documentation. It also comes with an inbuilt blogging system in it, and it's supported by Facebook. React Style Guide is another similar one, which is focused entirely on the React ecosystem. I like talking about Pattern Lab because all these are sort of framework specific, and they're a lot about JavaScript tooling specific. Pattern Lab comes from Brad Frost, who invented atomic design, and the concept of a design system actually has a strong parallel with how we compose together different atoms and molecules and elements and pages. So if you're familiar with atomic design at all, you'd be very familiar with the design system movement. And we'll actually do a little demo of Pattern Lab in a bit. But let's, just to give you an idea of where you can learn more about design systems, Figma actually has designsystems.com. It's not only about JavaScript tooling, it's also about having a consistent philosophy throughout the way you do spacing, typography, colors, all of that good stuff. So definitely check out designsystems.com for that. If you want to see examples of public design systems from other people, check out Design Systems repo. It's by my friend Jad, who works at Apple. Apple also has one. And you can see the massive array of tools, inspirations, public things that people are putting in production. Let's look for one. My favorite is the Priceline one, actually. It literally is called the Priceline one. Anyway, yeah. So as you build your design systems, you can definitely take advantage of these toolings. This tooling. Let's check a little bit about Pattern Lab because it's just such a fantastic tool for figuring out your design system. And let's actually check out the demo for that. This is patternlab.io for people following along. And so here we've defined our colors of fonts of buttons. And you can actually, just kind of scroll through and look at how your design system is set up. This is a very generic demo, but obviously personalize it to your look and feel of things. And even, and then obviously because we're designing for all sorts of clients, you can also mess with the widths of the window. And obviously, as front-end developers, our favorite thing is to just like start messing with the window with. So he automated that with disco mode, and now this just randomly automates that for you, which is pretty nice as you sort of scroll around. And I'm like, how does my dashboard look when I sort of stretch it around? As we sort of build in these opinions about how our sites should look and how we want to build our pages in our apps, we should then build tooling to support that productivity, to automate the things that we should do manually, because there's just so much to do. And then lastly, I also want to talk about Storybook. Storybook itself is a tool for building design systems, but they themselves have a design system as well, and obviously they are their own best users. So this is an example of a production thing that you can go fork, learn, whatever. So here it's like documentation for how to use the Storybook. Here's avatars that they actually use, documentation on their loading props, small, medium, large. As a developer, as a designer, this is great, right? I can check out like what I've set up the components for. As a developer, I can also refer to this when I'm coding. In fact, I can just go ahead and grab individual sections of code for the thing that I want, right? Like that's a very, very great way to increase your productivity over time. All right, so that's a demo of the first section, the design system section. We're moving lightning fast. We're also going on to talk about TypeScript. TypeScript is now estimated to be about 70% of production JavaScript, which is insanely huge. The main value of TypeScript is adding, I guess, write time and compile time checks to your dynamic JavaScript. So here I'm passing in a string to a function. I'm passing in a number to a function that expects a string, and then I get that error out of the box. And obviously, in regular JavaScript, that would just be casted to a string. I also like to talk about there's a very famous video making fun of JavaScript called WAT, and a lot of the errors that are caught by WAT will actually get caught at compile time, like so it won't even execute. But TypeScript's not even the only option. There's also Flow from Facebook, Reason also from Facebook, just because they have too much time on their hands. Elm and PureScript for people who like stronger opinions, I guess, strong functional languages. I don't even want to get into all of that, but the point is that this is a movement that people are going towards, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. Unfortunately, this is a little bit hard to talk about because TypeScript is so insanely dominant. To the point where Flow's existence is in question. Yeah, you had a question? Okay, you're good? All right. For more info about this, I'll refer you, I do have an intro to TypeScript. There's a bunch of people who've done intros to TypeScript. I do have an intro to TypeScript. This takes about an hour to talk a little bit about why TypeScript, what its design principles are compared to other forms of strongly typed languages, and maybe speculate a little bit about why it's been so successful. There recently has been a TypeScript conf, and the creator of TypeScript, Anders Hallsberg, but who, by the way, for whoever cares in the room, also created C# and and a bunch of, like, he's got like 30 years of.
I think TypeScript is more than just typing.
Yes.
More than just rigid typing, right? There's other benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I was planning to skip over that, but they have their type system attributes, which are very conscious choices in language design, and I think the primary benefit is incremental adoption, in the sense that it is by design not a strong, not a strict type system. And therefore, you can have a bunch of escape hatches as you slowly convert your existing JavaScript code base into a TypeScript code base. Because of that as well, the community has been able to also create a third-party typing system. For every single NPM package, there probably will be a corresponding third-party typing, even if that NPM package itself doesn't use TypeScript natively. So in other words, it's part of the success of its adoption is this intentional design that's allowed the community to convert without the consent of the original NPM package. Yeah.
Sorry. So it sounds like you're tracking adoption of a bunch of different technologies. So
Yes.
maybe you can answer this question. TypeScript started out with a lot of third parties writing the typings for libraries.
Yes.
And that created a lot of like weird, like, oh, is it behind the release? Is it out of
Yep.
date? Like, who's maintaining this thing? It's confusing.
Yep.
Are we seeing like how much of a migration to first-party typings are we seeing, and why is it still not 100%?
Wow. Okay. There's a lot out there, and there are a lot of people who don't like to use TypeScript because there's a learning curve. But there are ways to track it. I don't actually. I could look it up for you. I don't know how successful I would be at finding them. But basically, the idea is you take a random sample of npm packages out there. You look for the corresponding types, whether they're provided first party inside the package,
Sure.
or they're
I mean, the
definitely
question is
typed.
more general. For example, let's suppose I'm using Leaflet, a very popular mapping JS UI library thing.
Yeah.
Leaflet team writes its own stuff in JavaScript, and the typings are provided by a third party, and those typings are usually garbage.
Yep.
It would be cool if the Leaflet team takes a strong stance of never TypeScript, fine, third party is the best it can do.
Yep.
But perhaps we're seeing a migration to like libraries saying, well, we're JavaScript, but for this, like, we'll throw a bone to the TypeScript devs and just like provide a first-party typings definition so that your stuff is mostly in sync with our stuff.
Yes. So that is happening, but it's very, very slow. So for example, Redux recently rewrote themselves in TypeScript. The other thing I was going to refer people to is the cheat sheet that I helped to maintain for people learning React and TypeScript together. And a lot of, I also keep track of people migrating to TypeScript. And this is the whole goal is to help people learn or to just get examples of how people have done it. So to encourage communities to also migrate. So Jest rewrote themselves in TypeScript. Expo, Atlassian's open source stuff, Yarn, React Native CLI, Next.js, and Redux recently is the most recent entrant in that space. So people are doing it. It's just takes time and effort and community.
Was there really that big of a problem with type mismatch?
I mean, if the underlying JavaScript package changes API, then the types also have to update, right?
Right, but was it a real problem?
No, because there's ways to patch it, and any experienced TypeScript user should know how to figure that out.
Exactly.
But it's just like, we need people to chip in and help to maintain that. This is all open source. I saw a hand somewhere here earlier. No? All right. Okay, we can keep going, but definitely this is a mega trend within JavaScript, and I figured I should cover that. Third section, which is even more ambitious than that, because this covers both front end and back end, is GraphQL. Apollo is probably the leader in that space as far as front end web development is concerned. And I think there's been a number of GraphQL pitches at this conference, but the rough idea is that everything is a graph, so let's actually design a query language that reflects that with resolvers on the server side. So you can actually just declare what you want, and you get back JSON that reflects that. Yes. Okay. But GraphQL isn't, again, like, this is a whole theme of my talk. Even though I'm picking exemplar technologies, all of them are not the only players in that space. So on the tooling side, you have Relay, FetchQL, GraphQL Request, and Oracle for people who don't like Apollo. And even on the GraphQL side, as a protocol, there's competitor protocols like Protobuf, OData, Falcor. Falcor is more or less dead. It's only used by Netflix. And Vulkan, which actually launched this week as a competitor to GraphQL. But the whole idea is that people want to enhance their APIs. That the REST paradigm is very loosely enforced, doesn't really adapt very well to multiple clients. So a lot of the pitch of Apollo and a lot of the pitch of GraphQL is that you want that endpoint to be adapted to both your server, to both your desktop and your mobile clients, and to not have to create parallel implementations at every single time. And I can get way deep in that space, but the point is that we want smarter APIs, and this is the broad movement to enhance existing protocols or just create new ones to do that. I mean, GraphQL itself is a layer over HTTP and REST, so it's not in itself a direct competitor. Anyway, so that was the client side. We're also going to talk about the server side a little bit. Prisma is a dominant company here. This is even more in contention. But they built a lot of awesome tooling. That's why I want to give them the shout out. So here we have the GraphQL playground, and here you can actually introspect into your GraphQL schema. And this is all auto generated as part of your of a standards compliant GraphQL server. You just get this for free, which is amazing. Obviously, we have analogies of this in REST, but the tooling that's come out of this and the tooling that I've seen coming down the pike is very, very compelling. So as far as GraphQL backends is concerned, these are some of the other players. So again, I don't want to give you give you the impression that Prisma is the only player. These are all the GraphQL native companies, which are AWS, Hasura, and PostgreSQL. A lot of the times you can't just use GraphQL alone because GraphQL has no identity or authentication solution embedded within that. So you do need to nest that within business logic provided through serverless functions. I happen to work at a company that does that, but we don't have to talk about it that much. And also you want to integrate it together with third-party APIs because a lot of these are databases. But you also want to integrate that together with all the data that comes in that you might want to sort of mesh together. So you need a general compute layer, and then you have your persistence, and then you have your third-party APIs. 2 questions.
What are your thoughts on Apollo server?
Yes.
And Apollo GraphQL server, and also that versus like a classic server things, Java, Go, whatever.
Oh wow. I've only ever used Apollo server. I think it's great, but I just don't have time to try out every single implementation. Like pick the, I think you should pick the backend GraphQL server implementation that fits the rest of your backend best, and then just carry on from there. I mean,
if you don't have any backend, you're just starting.
Yeah, I mean, so Prisma and Apollo are 2 good choices. I mean that's a very broad question because I think the moment you like try to implement something, you really run into like the unique use cases, and you'll discover what you do or don't want. The Prisma CEO Johannes actually has a strong thesis around the way you declare schemas because as by default GraphQL schemas have a very verbose definition, and a lot of people have strong opinions about how they want to reduce that verbosity. So they want to go type first, resolver first, and he has a new thing like code first, which I don't understand. So some languages like Java and Python have a more resolver first approach, and JavaScript, and others have a more type first approach. So there are differing philosophies within the languages and within the frameworks that you choose. But they're all used in some form by people. So just pick the one that speaks to you the best, I guess. There was another question somewhere. No? All right, cool. We'll keep going. But yeah, I just want to give you that sense of overall technology. And this is more for people who want to just get started to see what it looks like, how it feels. GraphQL is super hard to demo because you have to build a functioning backend and a front end. So this is the minimal viable demo. Here's the backend, which is hosted on glitch.com. It's a proxy of the Dog CEO API. If you don't know the Dog CEO API, it gives you dogs, dog.ceo, that's the domain, and it just gives you dog pictures. In my line of work, this is important. Because there's nothing offensive about dogs, I think. Someday this random thing's gonna screw me. But here's the server implementation. It's only like maybe 100 lines of code, and literally it's oh god, it's so small. I'm sorry. So this is a demonstration of Apollo server wrapping a REST API. So the Dog CEO API, this is a traditional REST API. And the idea is that you can combine REST API and other different API sources and combine them into a single graph which you can query and compose your data together. So you have a type definition out here where you declare the nodes that you want in GraphQL schema definition language. Then you create your resolvers. So whenever something's something's requested, you teach the GraphQL server how to resolve those queries. And then you just supply the rest of that information. So the net effect of this, do I go here to view my app?
Is GraphQL written in JavaScript? Is that what that was?
No, so GraphQL is a spec with a reference implementation in JavaScript. But there are 20-something plus languages, all of which have other implementations. But it is a spec. So
so I could write a GraphQL middle layer in Ruby.
Yeah. In fact, there already is one.
Okay.
So.
But it has to be customized to your top and bottom layers, right? It doesn't just learn on its own.
So the main thing you have to do is it outputs a GraphQL compliant endpoint, and so whether you're writing it on your own or you're using a pre-existing framework, I think Ruby definitely has one. You just have to it just has to conform to the spec of when I send you a query that looks like this, what should you get back in return? In particular, GraphQL works on the basis of introspection queries, where you can send queries like meta queries about the shape of things and all that. So as long as your server conforms to that, then yes, you're a valid GraphQL server. It's a spec. It's not a language implementation.
How does it affect the performance?
How does it affect the performance? Great question. Did you have more to that question, or did you want the general
let's say
dump?
if I have lots of data, right? Now,
Yes.
let's say if I currently return lots of data,
Yes.
and I want GraphQL to format it to what it wants.
Yes. So I mean, if that's working fine for you, don't use GraphQL. But the idea is that because you're querying exactly what you need.
GraphQL in the middle has to transform by
Let me see.
data, right?
So for example, here I'm querying it for a dog, and it's got all this fields that I can query. I can specify in my query that I only want these two fields, right? And it just gives it back to me. So no extra requests of information, and then So I mean, so it's faster in the sense that your payload is basically customized to exactly only the data that you're going to use, which as you use any REST API over time, it's just going to have a bunch of stuff in there that you don't use.
Yeah. So that means I don't need my REST API endpoint anymore. I just use GraphQL connect.
Yes,
to my
single
server.
endpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, use GraphQL is to connect to my server and
Yes.
do the custom query by
Yes.
using GraphQL. But I could just do because dynamically the front end can change whatever.
Yes. So as you code, you can dynamically change it. In practice, though, people don't actually want to do that because there's a second saving at scale. So imagine this query is super big, right? Like it's just very big query. So so download times are typically a lot faster than upload times, especially on mobile. So we also want to optimize the upload times, and there's a built-in system within GraphQL called GraphQL queries and GraphQL variables and persistent queries that basically say, all right, if you're sending all these queries, if you're just requesting this all the time, let's just have an alias for this. So like query number 5, and we'll send that off. And so that's a very, very fast request response, and it's optimized at build time. Hopefully that helps.
I have this feeling that this is probably have a scope limited to certain scope of use cases for using GraphQL. It would not be a replacement for REST API.
That's entirely up to you. I think that there's reasonable people who disagree on that. I do also want to be honest about one of the performance issues that people worry about is that it's very easy to do very expensive queries. So I can have top level query and query a property of that and a property of that, property of that, property of that, and there's no sense of like the cost of that query, and it's very easy to build up query like an expensive and very slow query. So there are ways to optimize for that on the server side using a system called Data Loader, which is just like a flattening and caching service, as well as a way to estimate query complexity. So you're just not allowed to create a query that has a high that goes over your complexity budget. So complex topic, but people have worked it out and they're using it in production. For example, the companies that I've already named, and more because I don't have time to name all of them. On the client side, I also want to give you the corresponding clients for that. for that example. And here you can get a sense of how to consume that GraphQL API. And literally the way to request it is as simple as this. And if I had more time, I would just sort of just edit that and add a field and then make it show up on the screen. But you get the idea that I have a single endpoint. It speaks a language, standardized with standardized types, and I can query that. And the development workflow is very smooth over here. But absolutely feel free to make use of these examples because that's the only way you're going to get a sense of what it's like. There are other resources as well. If you're very keen on this, I have gone very deep on it. So just come up to me later. All right, React. This has been around the longest out of all these technologies. So actually, that's not true. Let me just not say that. So anyway, so React is the current dominant framework. Obviously, varies depending on what community you're a part of. But also, they're not the only players within the front-end framework space. There's also Vue, Angular, Svelte, and Ember. I'm a big fan of Svelte. The problems with all the front-end frameworks, though, are performance issues and SEO issues. So the ways, the current areas of contention is actually not this stuff. It's actually, do we want to generate things on the server side, or do we want to pre-generate things pre-generate them as static pages and then hydrate them? So that's the current area of debate. There's these are the React versions, the React equivalents of these two sides. Gatsby does the pre-generated static pages, rehydrates them into single-page apps, and then you can use them on your way. I'll get right to you. And then Next.js is the server-rendered equivalent. So the work to render your pages is done on request time. Yes?
How is that debate/trend going about server-side rendering for these? Are we leaning that way, or
I'd say it's a dead heat right now, and I happen to work at a company that is very, very heavily in favor of the static approach, just because. So both of these are rendered server-side. So you render. So the problem with all of these front-end frameworks by default is you send a blank HTML page. It just shows up as white, and then you have to run JavaScript.
Right.
You have to download and run JavaScript to actually have any content. So it's bad for SEO, bad for performance, right? So the way to optimize them is one of these two approaches: either server render them or statically render them ahead of time. So
isn't that the same? I thought that was the same.
They're not the same. So statically render is you do it once, and then everyone else on every request, there's no extra work to be done. So you can just federate them to CDNs and just serve them from their reference points. There is no, you don't need a server anymore. You literally put it on a CDN. So my company, Netlify, we are the CDN that hosts these files. So you're only doing the work once when you actually build or publish or push.
Then what about the look and feel of their single-page app with those
Can we get this question answered? I'm sorry. I asked a question about the conversation about server-side rendering. Where is it going?
Yes.
And you actually gave two different flavors of server-side rendering. Neither one of those are on the browser. So where is that going? Is that just another blip on the scale, or is the whole single-page app stuff leaning towards server-side rendering?
So everyone, absolutely the trend is towards server-side rendered because we need that SEO and performance.
Great.
I'm just saying there are two approaches in server-side rendering, and that actually matters in terms of how you deploy your sites. So the Next.js one, just to make it very clear, is distinct. Pages are only generated on request, right? So there's work to be done on that server, and you need to maintain and run that server. So there are companies that specialize on that. Basically the competitor of Netlify, is on that fence, and Netlify is on the other side of that fence. And
great. So the whole idea of a single-page app and a browser and stuff like that is starting to be going.
It is still the easiest way to get started, right?
Yeah, but not.
But production-wise, yeah.
Great.
Okay, so
This
yeah,
two approaches are
relevant to your
confusing.
question. So the server-side of rendering is not.
I'm sorry, he's in the middle of the question.
Yes.
I'll get back to you.
Yeah, so they're a little bit confusing. Can you frame it as a build time rendering versus request time rendering? Like static, what do you call static?
Yes.
It's a build time, right?
Yes.
And the other one is like request time, right?
Yes, I have a slide in a different that's my next slide. Not at all. I understand. Like you want to know.
Yes,
Maybe,
my question actually is The same version of his, just slightly different wording.
Yes. Okay.
The
So
same.
so let me just like frame it for you. This is a graphic from Google, which is really helpful to understand. The reason client-side single-page app things are slow and unperformant is that you have to do all this stuff before you actually you have to request the HTML, and then the HTML links to all those assets, download the assets, process them, and then actually render something, right? And then you can actually interact with it. So the server-side trick is to actually just do the work. Is to flip the rendering. So you actually just send in HTML, and browsers are actually really good at rendering right away. And then you download. You sort of defer the download of all the other unnecessary assets. So you just get it perform much quicker, right? And so. But you're still doing the work on request every single time someone comes in. So obviously, this is pros and cons. The pro is that you can respond and update extremely quickly because you control this. The con is that this costs money on every request. So the ultimate sort of cheapest cost, I guess, is to move that build to the build time, statically generate all this, and then this is as cheap as just file hosting. So that's the rough idea towards these paradigms, and if you compare them in terms of performance, this is kind of what you get in terms of time to interactive from your first request. All of this comes from an article that Google wrote called "Rendering on the Web." Absolutely check this out. Obviously, I'm also recording this session as well. But the idea is that static rendering is the ideal fastest because you're literally just sending HTML with the trade-off that you do have a build time. Yes.
So we are going round.
I'll get to you.
We're going round. So we're going round. We were serving
Yes.
HTML only
Yes.
before.
Yes.
Then we went to single page app.
Yes.
Now we're going back to just serving HTML before.
Yes.
But in the middle, we are used to have all those very nice interactions with a single page app. So where that will fit in.
When you download the JavaScript at the end.
But we do it in build time.
What do you mean?
So we'll talk about now we favor the build time.
Okay.
HTML rendering. So
Yes.
we only download the HTML now.
Yes.
Right? So everything's already there, already compiled, it's just served down.
Yes.
So where is the single page app interaction being added in?
You hydrate your HTML at the end, and then you can interact with any API, however you like. The same way as your phone's mobile apps are static assets and the interactive APIs. So that has a very nice synergy with GraphQL as well, actually.
So how does it differ from the server side rendering? The server
Same
side
thing.
rendering without the
Same way, except that you're able in a server-side rendering paradigm, you're able to do a data fetch here.
because I did some server side rendering with React before. The rehydration is not always ideal.
Well, that's that's why you use a framework, and it can always get better. I'll take your question.
So my question is, like, in ancient times, I mean 5 years ago,
Ancient times.
we were doing server-side rendering at that time.
Yes.
Then we doing from that framework.
Yes.
Then now we transform back
Yes.
to this. So which part is changing? Because we optimize like HTML much better now, or
No. So that has. I mean, the primary like WordPress serves 40% of the web, right? And they just took in $300 million to go serve 85% of the web. So that is not out of date at all. This is a way to optimize for JavaScript frameworks, right? As well as for people who are serverless first, so they don't want to run an existing server. They rather just build ahead of time and serve via CDN. And the argument is that, and I've seen. My company has customers that I don't want this to be a company pitch, okay? But straight up, like I just came from a conference where we have customers that saved a lot of money just because they reduce that server running cost, which you don't really need if you're just building ahead of time. So it's all about like how often do you update versus it's a static optimization, right? Like use that if it makes sense for you. But definitely doing work on every request can have a cost. That makes sense. I have a whole separate talk about this. I didn't want to. I actually I don't have time to get into that. But this is more of an server-side architecture talk. Like what are the costs of running running and scaling that server and versus the trade-off of just serving static files. question, and then I'll.
Okay, just hopefully quick on.
Yes.
What is the engineering cost of doing server-side rendering versus like?
There is one as well. You lean on frameworks or you build your own. I cannot give you one answer for that.
Ballpark.
What? What, you want numbers?
No, if you have like front-end application, no server-side rendering, and
Yes.
now you sit down and add server-side rendering, is it like 10%, 20%, 80%?
It really depends on how you write your data fetching, because if you write everything with the assumption that you're going to be able to fetch it on the client side, then you're actually going to just end up with a bad implementation. There are bad ways to do it and there are good ways to do it. I don't know how to tell. I don't want to tell you. Like it's the Next.js and Gatsby are very good frameworks for taking existing client-side React applications, just chuck them into those frameworks, and you'll have a reasonably performant static or server-side rendered app. To do it well, you probably need to do some extra work on top of that. But I mean, this stuff is being used at Next.js is being used by a top 10 website in the world. Like Gatsby is being used at PayPal. Like all of these things have been tested at scale. It's really up to you and your resources. Jeez, wow. These are really great questions. I hope, look, I don't know everything, right? Like, I hope that you take these questions and you look at these with the same critical eyes that you're asking me right now, because I mean, I only know from my perspective. I really want you to talk to others who've actually bled over these things and actually arrive at your own conclusions. But these are interesting technologies. They have value for these companies. So let me just sum up, and then I'll come back to you. So instead of asking, I started this whole thing with like specific technologies, but I wanted to generalize, right? This is the time to generalize. I know some of you like that. So there's too many logos. Let's just like step back from that and like look at trends. So instead of using Storybook, instead of focusing on Storybook, we actually just want to build a design system so for more reusable components and more consistent visual feel. Instead of TypeScript, we're actually just going for static typing so we can improve developer productivity, particularly catching bugs that otherwise show up in production. And there's obviously a debate versus how much you can catch with tests. Just note that Airbnb is one of the most strictest tests out there, and even then, they have a lot of bugs to get through. So Apollo and GraphQL, that movement is more about smart APIs and what we can do to get more productivity out of our back-end and front-end connections. And in terms of frameworks, the current war or the current movement is from client to server, and then within server, ready to statically render or do it on request. So hopefully like that sort of, like I took all of that and I like pulled out the letters and I called them star apps. And that was the thesis of my article on CSS tricks, and that's why I'm sort of doing this talk today, because I think it's an interesting trend. I also want to talk about why. So we just covered what, and even that was super interesting, right? Like knowing all the names, knowing what they do, knowing all the logos. But let's talk about why. I just want to boil it down to two sort of trends, two overall sort of needs that we have in our apps and our sites. We want consistency and we want data. We want visual consistency for our design systems to look the same. That's a very that's not the words that a designer would use, right? The designers want to be special and convey some sort of overall mood. They would be able to. I'm not a designer, but I think the consistency is a common request among all these things. Code consistency between the contracts that we have between our modules and our functions and our backend and our front end, which we'll talk a little bit about how we communicate those types as well. Data manipulation and as well as data representation. So hopefully, like, that's why we have this tooling. Like, we don't do this for fun. It's not fun at all to create all this, but we do want the ultimate end product to have more consistency, to handle more data intelligently. And these are the tools that with which we actually use to handle that complexity. There are dangers. So first danger is learning curve. I just covered a whole bunch of shit. This is a chart of like the learning map of a React developer in 2019. Over here at the end, there's a very passive-aggressive, keep learning smiley face. We, as an industry, if we keep adding tools, it is going to raise the barrier of entry. we have to really make sure that the tools that we add are introduced in the right way and carry their weight in terms of the complexity that they also introduce. There's also tool churn. So picking any specific tool within this field, they may not be around in 2-3 years. We have to be either make peace or be comfortable with that. Open source is a huge part of this because you can fork, because you can modify. So tool churn exists. Let's also talk about open source. Most of it's self-funded or has no funding whatsoever. So that's why you get people having freakouts and all that good stuff. But I also think that as tooling gets more and more serious in this space, I'm sorry for the bad resolution. I mean, you don't I'm giving you the big hits. As tooling gets more serious in this space, open source is actually not so badly funded. It actually is maybe too well funded. Each of these tools that I just talked about are spoken for by each of these individual companies on the right. So there is no the governance model also changes, and the agendas of each of these individual companies also reflect in the tooling choices that you choose as well. So the problems of open source are well documented. Last one I actually probably should put first, I don't know, is that all these technologies front load work. You don't need any of these tools to get something showing on screen, to get things, to get your app started. And so that's why the idea that this is a cost per feature chart. This is not scientific at all, but the idea is that to get out your first feature, if you want to invest in all these tooling, you're actually front loading all this work upfront. And this is why there's a dedicated class of engineer called infrastructure engineer that is becoming an increasing category in job descriptions, who specialize in reducing this cost. But the idea is that you do it once, and then all subsequent, as far as possible, subsequent feature additions will be cheaper compared to no tooling. Yeah? That's the rough idea. I'm obviously not the best at designing graphics. But I think the last point I want to make is that it's all about the workflow. Despite all the dangers, despite all the tool churn, we want to have the workflow that this provides. So these are where you start to get benefits from combining these things. So you want end-to-end typing, you want designer developer handoff. I'll give you some examples of this. So I'll come back to this slide. So here we have integrations between TypeScript and GraphQL, because once you have a GraphQL backend, you can generate TypeScript frontends or vice versa. So GraphQL CodeGen, Zeus, Nexus, and TypeGraphQL are all really, really cool ways of adopting this, of doing this work, so that any breaking changes that you make on the backend automatically get reflected and updated on the front end. Likewise, I strongly recommend this talk from Lauren Tan of Netflix, and this is how Netflix views their end-to-end typing charts. Where again, this is too small, but again, you start from the back end and you sort of generate your types and you keep them in sync. So you actually have a very strong workflow for end-to-end typing. And again, these are coming out of each of these tools are adopted individually, but then the combinations are also interesting. That's the point I'm trying to make. That you're adopting GraphQL and TypeScript, and you get some cool tooling out of that. Airbnb also has this. I recommend this talk from Adam Neary, where he live codes on the production Airbnb site and shows you how the GraphQL code generation tooling works at Airbnb. Definitely, they're the only ones doing this right now, but it definitely is an interesting idea of flowing the backend types to the front end. The other kind of workflow, the designer developer workflow. Brad Frost is also very sort of notable in that area. And this is, again, the resolution sucks here, but the idea is that your design tools speak React or speak your front-end framework, whatever it is, and the React frameworks can be rendered inside your design tools. So that integration of design systems and your front-end framework. There are two tools that I'm tracking for this. There are probably more out there, but these are the two more prominent ones. React SketchUp, again, I'm sorry to refer to Airbnb so much in this situation, but literally you open your React components inside of Sketch. Framer is the other way around. You have the design tool that outputs React components. And so this, again, is intersection of React and design systems. What else do I have? Documentation. So the other, obviously docs are important and we don't write them. So it's nice to have documentation auto-generated. Here's a React Doctrine TypeScript loader. Let's just take a quick look at how this looks. How am I doing for time? Good. All right. So this is how it looks inside of Storybook. So this is a plugin to Storybook, and here's how it looks inside of that, where you can actually play with the component, but then also get the source for that component as well as the props that are dedicated to it. So within your design system, you're able to use that as a source of truth as well. What's the other one? And docs I already showed you as well. Anyway, so I could go on. I didn't want to get into the performance thing today, but that's also an interesting element of combining smart APIs and rendering. But the main thing that all of these tools, I think, if they do it well, they optimize for change in the sense that as you add features, it's not too much of a lift to change things around. And because of the workflow that they enable, they really help to optimize your workflow for change. And that's a really good blog post by Dan Abramov from the React core team if you're interested in this idea of optimizing for change. All right, so I'm almost done. This is I think we're in the pre-talk, we were talking about why stacks are moving. I think you're interested in like lab stack versus mean stack. Stacks are moving because the backend is getting commoditized. We used to worry about operating systems and hardware. Now those are provided as part of clouds. So then we start to worry less about runtimes and data. And as we move from sort of infrastructure as a service to like sort of platform as a service and to serverless functions, then we are just writing business logic. That's always the goal of what we want. Like stop doing the undifferentiated heavy lifting and just do the thing that makes your app sets your app apart. So this is the sort of direct answer. Chris Coyer has an awesome talk. That's located at fullstack.netlify.com. An awesome talk talking about how we used to view backend versus frontend. We used to view, all right, LAMP, this is backend concern. And then as a front-end developer, I'm just all the way over there. I do JavaScript, CSS, HTML. And over here, I worry about OS, database, service, and service languages. And as time moves by, that just kind of moves on towards like straddling the two, you know? So we no longer worry about OS, but we worry about databases, servers, server-side languages, and maybe go all the way out to JavaScript, and that's the A of mean. And front-end developers kind of straddle that, and it's like, yeah, all right, I'm full stack maybe. But as this starts to get managed and commoditized, you really just like worry about business logic all the way, and your tooling choices and your infrastructure and your engineering is all front end. So that's the idea of Star. So the answer to what is driving front end architecture decisions, I think these 4 things are things to bet on. I think we're only in the early days, and that's why I want to highlight debates that are going on in these things. I don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything. I think these are things worth tracking and investing in, and I hope you do too. So yeah, that's my talk. Thanks for having me, and I'll stay for questions.
There's the URL talk.
There is no. I haven't uploaded this, but I will. Swix.io/talks for all my talks, and I've recorded this, and I'll put it on my YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
You
my
had a lot of good
question-
questions.
The question was for static rendering. I think there's specific use cases for people who web pages are normally static, the majority are static.
Yeah.
Then like you were talking about, there's no need for server. You can just upload it to S3 buckets,
Yes.
right?
Netlify is literally value-added
That's
S3.
what it was.
Value-added S3.
All right.
Combined with Route 53 and
Yeah.
API Gateway and stuff like that.
Okay.
But like, that's probably cheaper than anything else.
Definitely. So you cut one nail.
Like, so we had a conference this week, and we had a Loblaw, which is like the biggest retailer in e-commerce retailer in Canada.
Okay.
They had 70% reduction in their server costs just doing this thing.
That's right.
Because it's all just serverless, and then it scales nicely on big e-commerce days.
Yeah.
It's great. You don't have to worry about scaling.
Great. Thank you. Thank
No
you.
worries, thank you.
I had a question since you researched so much about all of this stuff. in
Yeah.
general. So
Is that too ambitious?
I thought it was pretty ambitious.
I know.
Those are pretty like huge terms.
Who does this, right?
I spent a lot of time
It's
reading
my
on.
first time doing a talk like this, so I'm
I've read up on it, and it takes a long freaking time. But my question is about design systems for cross-platform and React and like React Native. I know React Native Web has been like kind of picking up some,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have like it's. I feel like it's still challenging.
Yeah.
Like because I think Uber is using
Yep.
React Native Web to do cross-platform. Have you had experience working with React Native Web and making design systems that are cross-platform?
So that's an easy answer, no. But I think so. As JavaScript-centric people, we have a tendency to tie design systems too much to tooling, when design systems really are about a consistent set of rules that are kind of implementation independent. Like if you start to leak implementation details, like yes, the tooling sort of binds them together, right? And that makes sense in some cases. But if that starts getting in the way of your intention, which is cross-platform, then probably you won't want to do that. My counter to that is you probably don't want to reuse the same components because they're very different UI paradigms. Maybe, I mean, it really depends on your design, but most people don't, I think.
And also the performance. Like if you try to reuse it so much, then you lose. Given, for example, if you have something on the web, you want to treat it as a first-class citizen, right? Whereas if you have something on native, you also want to treat it as a first-class citizen. If you're trying to reuse both, then you might be making compromises on like the web and whatnot. I think actually Uber, they rolled out their own like framework. I don't think they might not be using React Native Web as much. They have their own framework that is open source, and they talk about how they use that for like the mobile apps on the web and whatnot, and they try to do that to avoid actually making those like constraints that might like hinder one platform versus like the other.
Right,
It's super interesting.
I was really curious about this. We were doing React Native. I haven't worked, but I'm not on the front end, so maybe I missed that. But it doesn't look like that. Like the mobile app, there's a mobile front end which is like awesome, but it is so different from the native app. It's like totally different technology. Nothing in common. It just works. That's different. Because otherwise, they wouldn't be able to pull it out.
And that mobile app uses that framework.
That's like Uber Eats. I think they were using something that was trying to
Okay,
cross.
on the edges, probably, but not like for your main money app.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to double click on this Apollo server thing.
Yes.
So there's Apollo client and Apollo server, right? And then on the back end, people may say, okay, yeah, we don't know the Node.js on the back end. I'm facing this situation, not little. So we know Java, so we want to do backend in Java, right? Which is fine. But is there any kind of advantage in like this Apollo client versus Apollo server?
Yes.
I mean, one is server side rendering. I get that. Anything else you can think about?
Huge. Yeah. So this is their venture capital pitch. So you can go check that out. But basically, the idea is take a big step back, right?
Yeah.
The like Datadog and like all these like tooling built on top of existing APIs. There's a chance to rebuild the entire ecosystem on GraphQL as this ecosystem shifts. So Apollo, they add extra sort of things that are not in the spec that provide information between the client and server implementations. Meaning that there's a benefit when you use both. They actually provide a SaaS for monitoring, for performance checking and reporting and like billing and all these kinds of things. So the client is open source, the server is open source. They provide an engine that reads all the extra metadata that's getting sent back and forth and tracking invocations and all that. So they want to offer that tooling that used to be for that, like, do you know what I mean? Like there are all these services that are provided in existing.
There's a lot of backend
stuff that you have
services.
to do. So they want to provide the tooling as an extra service. So you could build a clone of that, but obviously Apollo is going to be the best at maintaining that. They're very financially incentivized.
Yeah, and one last one.
Yeah.
So the serverless, like, so Apollo server or anything else, GraphQL server as a serverless application, is it feasible at all?
Yes. In fact, Apollo, their CEO strongly believes that every single resolver should be a serverless function. So, yeah. Yes.
But that's a deployment nightmare. If you have like 200 resolvers.
Only if you're, I mean, that's solvable with RBNB platforms that go with that. For like, it's not a problem for serverless or Netlify or Zeit to deploy those hundreds of serverless functions.
Right. Yeah, but then every resolver, every particular resolver is a separate function.
Yeah.
There's also
I'll have
these
to look
things
at
like
that.
federation with Apollo server, where you can federate multiple one of those
Right.
resolvers.
Yeah, that's if you have a very rich backend.
I mean, so like, look, all these are optimizations on top of the existing idea. If you just buy the core idea of GraphQL, that's the main value
Yeah,
add.
no, that's
These
true.
are all just like messing around at the edges, right?
Right.
Follow up with that. What's your opinion on linking or attaching Next.js with the Apollo server to do server-side rendering to SEO performance?
Yeah, you should do it.
Yes.
So that slide, the one that I skipped one of them, which is this one.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Okay.
I don't have one of the reasons I skipped is that I don't have a good demo or visual of that. So. But people are doing it.
Uh-huh.
They haven't really talked about it yet.
Okay.
So these are still early days of all this stuff.
Yeah, I work as Course Hero. We are like moving to server-side
You work
rendering.
at Coursera?
No, Course Hero.
Of Course Hero.
Similar.
So Coursera is actually exactly
Right.
one of these companies that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I know the infra team there, and yeah.
So we're considering like server-side rendering now, and we're looking into it. We're looking to like Next.js, Apollo server,
Yeah.
session, all that.
So the thing about no one does this yet, but this is what React is working towards, which is streaming server-side rendering. Right now, you got to do a full data fetch, then render.
Correct.
Ideally, you're fetching, rendering, and then streaming to the client. So that's the maximum possible thing that performance that you can have. So React will be the first to have it, and then hopefully the other frameworks will follow. Yes, if you use Next.js, you are in the best spot to take advantage of that. It
Or
just doesn't exist.
that's what like Sebastian is working on
Yes.
full time now.
It just
in the
doesn't
industry.
exist.
Yeah.
But only for SEO, I wouldn't do it. I mean, you can get around SEO.
You can pre-render. There are
Right,
other
or actually the what is it? The crawlers they have some measure of JavaScript in them. So
There are costs to that. For example, Google has an explicit 12-week delay on crawling non-static content.
I see.
So they can handle it, and they're improving every year, but it's always gonna be second class to just statically rendering.
Have you had any experience with? There is a library that Henry and I work in the same team at. We were talking about. We found this library the other day where you download an npm, you put it on your React app, and it helps you with SEO because it turns all your components into the actual static HTML without having to do server-side rendering. You remember?
I don't know what.
Yeah, so there is apparently it's very popular. npm I found it the other day, and where you take all your component and then you make it so that your crawlers are gonna find. the
Yeah,
content.
I've heard of. It's like a Webpack plugin, I think.
No, it's a package on npm. It's a package.
Right,
Forgot the
that
name.
you install in Webpack.
No, you just download it, and I think you just filter your components through that.
No, I've heard of this. I just haven't used it. So
Me neither.
it's
It
so big.
just crossed my radar the other day, and I just saw it had a lot of downloads. That's all.
Yeah. Yes, it's been mentioned on the Reddit. I wanted to recommend you a talk. So Nick Schrock, one of the three creators of GraphQL. Nick Schrock is one of them, and he talked about basically the title is exactly what you're thinking about right now, which is his talk was Revenge of the Monolith, in the sense that we swung too far towards microservice everything, and GraphQL is us wanting the good parts of the monolith, which is a single central.
Nick, what can you spell?
SCHROCK.
Okay, got it.
But the title is easy to remember, Revenge of the Monolith. So this is a debate, like how much GraphQL should be federated and how much should be a monolith. I think most people just start with a monolith and you're fine.
Oh.
And then
Yes.
only when your introspection queries start to give you
So,
a problem.
right. There's a boundary where you need to start doing microservices.
Yes.
And yeah, it's somewhere between like 20 and 100 engineers. But most people are not there.
Yeah. So he gives that
Okay,
exact talk,
cool.
and
Okay.
I think he's trying to push back against people prematurely federating everything, which everyone's super excited about, and like my company has a financial incentive for that because the more functions, the better usage, the more sticky it is. But absolutely, most people should stick to monolith first,
Fair enough.
and then solve this problem.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to kind of
Thank you.
uploading that.
But thanks for asking all
Thank
these
you.
questions.
I hope I see you in
Happy.
the GraphQL conference. Are you gonna be there?
I'm doing a different conference, but I'll be watching along. Thank you.
Hey, so you gonna publish this? You mentioned?
Yeah.